The silence in the foyer was heavy, a sharp contrast to the electric warmth that had filled the dining room only moments before. Lydia Ashworth stood in the center of the marble floor like a ruthless statue, her presence cutting through the house's motherly warmth like a jagged blade. She didn't look like a woman who had been in hiding. She looked like a queen returning to a golden cage. She had never officially abdicated. Her voice, a smooth, cultured purr, carried a terrifying weight of condescension that made Simone's working-class pride bristle instantly. "Is this how you greet your fiancé, Luca?" Lydia asked, her flawless dark skin gleaming under the crystal chandeliers as she leveled an ugly sneer at Simone. The word fiancé hung in the air like a security breach, shattering the fragile fairy tale Simone had begun to believe in. Simone felt her heart pounding against her ribs, her mahogany eyes darting to Luca, whose hard, intense stare was now fixed on the ghost from his past. In an instant, the kitchen wasn't a chef's paradise anymore. It was a battlefield, and the magic in Simone's hands was about to be tested by a woman who played for keeps. Lydia's presence in the foyer felt like a cold front moving through a summer evening, chilling the air and making the marble floors feel like ice beneath Simone's feet. Luca stood paralyzed for a heartbeat, his intense gaze flickering with a rare shadow of uncertainty as he looked between the woman from his past and the woman who had brought life back into his kitchen. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant, muffled sound of Zuri and Matteo's laughter from the safe room upstairs, a sound that now felt like a fragile glass ornament on the verge of shattering. "Luca, you haven't said a word," Lydia purred, stepping closer to him and placing a manicure hand on his chest, her eyes never leaving Simone. "Is this how you greet the woman who is forced into hiding to protect your interests? Or have you been too distracted by the help?" Simone felt a hot flash of indignation rise in her chest, the same fire she had used to defend Matteo on the street. She wasn't just the help. She was the woman who had seen the father behind the boss and the boy behind the silence. But looking at Lydia's flawless skin and the effortless way she commanded the room, Simone's old self-doubt, the ghost of her ex-husband's betrayals, whispered that she was once again out of her league. "Lydia, this is not the time," Luca finally rumbled, his voice dropping into that deep, dangerous bass that signaled his violent temper was simmering just below the surface. He gently but firmly removed her hand from his chest. "Simone is not the help. She is the reason my son is eating. She is the reason this house has a pulse again." Lydia's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed, two dark pools of calculating ice. "A pulse is fine, Luca, but a legacy requires more than soul food and sentiment." She turned her gaze back to Simone, her expression dripping with a condescension that made Simone's working-class pride bristle. "I'm sure you've been well compensated, Miss Carter. But the danger tonight proves that this estate is no place for a civilian and her child. You should pack your things before the real threats arrive." The threat was veiled, but Simone heard it clearly. It wasn't just about the security breach. It was about the territory. Lydia was claiming the mansion, the children, and the man. "I'm not going anywhere until Luca tells me to," Simone said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She met Lydia's gaze with the same hard eyes she used when a customer tried to shortchange her at the stall. "I made a promise to Matteo, and I don't break my word to children." Luca looked at Simone, and for a fleeting second, the electric tension from their dinner returned, a silent acknowledgement of the strength he had seen in her from the very beginning. But then he looked back at Lydia, and the weight of his Mafia obligations seemed to settle back onto his broad shoulders. "Simone, take Zuri and Matteo to the East Wing," Luca commanded, his voice returning to the cold authority of the Santoro boss. "Enzo will stay with you. Lydia and I have matters to discuss that don't involve the kitchen." As Simone gathered the children, she felt Lydia's eyes tracking her every move like a hawk watching prey. She realized then that the golden cage had just become a battlefield, and the woman in the plum-colored dress was a far more dangerous enemy than any rival mob boss with a gun. Simone walked away, her heart heavy with the realization that the fairy tale had just become a fight for survival, and she wasn't sure if her magic was enough to win. Would you like me to continue where Simone and Lydia have their first direct confrontation in the kitchen? Subscribe to Sobless Love Stories to get more of these stories. Back to where Luca reveals the scars of his past. The following morning, the kitchen, usually Simone's sanctuary of magic and joy, felt like a cold, sterile boardroom. Simone was at the marble island, her hands moving with the rhythm that only comes from years of practice, as she prepped a breakfast of honey cornbread and fruit. The silence was broken by the sharp, rhythmic click of heels. Lydia Ashworth entered, her presence dripping with condescension, as she leaned against the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator, watching Simone with a pinched expression. "It's fascinating," Lydia began, her voice a smooth, cultured purr that didn't hide the ugly sneer beneath it. "Luca tells me you have a gift. But looking at you, all I see is a woman in a pink satin bonnet who belongs behind a food truck window, not managing the palate of a Santoro heir." Simone didn't look up, her mahogany eyes focused on the precision of her knife work. "A Santoro heir needs to be fed with love, Lydia. Not just kale and quinoa that taste like grass." She set the knife down and finally met the other woman's gaze with righteous anger. "Matteo hasn't just been hungry for food, he's been hungry for someone real. And no amount of money can buy the connection we have." Lydia laughed, a sound as brittle as dry wood. "Real? You are a temporary distraction, Simone. A working-class bandage on a deep, Mafia wound. You think because you made a chocolate lava cake that you've earned a seat at this table?" She stepped closer, her designer dress brushing against the flower on Simone's apron. "Luca lives by control and danger. He doesn't need warmth. He needs an ally who understands blood, sweat, and tears on a global scale, not a local corner." "Maybe he's tired of the danger," Simone countered, her voice dropping to a calm but firm tone. "Maybe he's tired of watching his son fade away, while women like you worry about Michelin star standards instead of a child's heart." Lydia's flawless dark skin tightened, her cheekbones looking sharper in the morning light. "We shall see how long your magic lasts when the security breaches become a daily reality. This golden cage has bars for a reason, Simone. And you're just the bird he caught to keep his son from chirping." As Lydia turned on her designer heels and stormed out, Simone felt the electric tension in the room shift into a heavy, loaded weight. She looked at the honey garlic glaze she was preparing, her heart pounding with the realization that the fairy tale was officially over. Lydia wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was a ruthless reminder that Simone was a civilian in a world of violence and power. The following afternoon, the mansion felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. The air in the library was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and the sharp, metallic tang of tension as Luca met with his top lieutenants to discuss the recent security breach. Simone could hear his voice from down the hall, a deep, commanding rumble that had sharpened into a terrifying roar of violent temper. Luca was no longer the barefoot father who watched his son swim. He was the Mafia boss, whose intense eyes saw every failure as a personal betrayal. How did they get past the perimeter? Luca's voice thundered, followed by the heavy thud of a fist hitting a mahogany desk. "I pay for control, not for excuses." Lydia stood by the window, her pinched expression, one of cool calculation as she watched the men cower. "Anger won't fix the gate, Luca," she said, her voice a smooth, cultured purr that only seemed to stoke the flames of his frustration. Simone stood outside the door, clutching a tray of fresh-baked dinner rolls that filled the hallway with a heavenly aroma. She knew she should walk away, that she was a civilian in a world of blood and power, but her motherly warmth wouldn't let her leave him in that state. She took a deep breath, straightened her pink satin bonnet, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The room went dead silent. The lieutenants looked at her like she was a ghost, and Lydia's ugly sneer returned with a vengeance. Luca turned, his face a mask of cold, judging fury, his athletic build coiled like a spring. "Not now, Simone," he hissed, his intense stare pinning her to the spot. "You haven't eaten since the breach. "Luca," Simone said, her voice calm but firm despite the heart pounding against her ribs. She walked past the armed men and set the tray directly on the desk, right over his tactical maps. "A man who's starving can't make good decisions. And your son is waiting for you to finish, so we can have chocolate lava cake." The mention of Matteo acted like a glacier melting in real time. The room watched in stunned silence as Luca's sharp jaw relaxed, his gaze drifting from the maps to the magic food Simone had prepared. He looked at her, and for a second, the electric tension was back, a silent acknowledgement that she was the only person in the golden cage who wasn't afraid of his violent reputation. He reached out, taking a roll, the steam rising around his trimmed beard. Lydia's cheekbones seemed to sharpen with jealousy as she realized Simone had achieved in seconds what Lydia's Mafia logic couldn't do in hours. "The rest of you get out," Luca commanded, his voice returning to a barely above a murmur. As the men scrambled out, he looked at Simone with a mixture of interest and curiosity. "You have a dangerous habit of interrupting me, Simone. And you have a habit of forgetting that you're a father first," she countered, her mahogany eyes holding his. Lydia watched the interaction from the shadows of the library, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut through the sudden warmth Simone had brought into the room. She realized that to remove Simone, she couldn't just attack her standing with Luca. She had to sever the magic bond Simone shared with the children. The next morning, while Simone was busy prepping for a sold-out day in the mansion's kitchen, Lydia found Zuri and Matteo in the home theater, where they were usually lost in animated movies. Lydia didn't enter with a smile. She entered with the cold authority of a woman used to controlling people. "Matteo, dear, it's time for your tutor," Lydia stated, her voice a smooth, cultured purr that felt like a command. "And Zuri, I've arranged for a nanny to take you to a separate wing. You've been spending far too much time in the kitchen. It's making you common." Zuri looked up, her 7-year-old face scrunched with curiosity and fear. "But Mommy said we were going to make honey cornbread today." "Your mother is busy with the help," Lydia sneered, her ugly expression frightening the girl. "In this house, we don't rub elbows with the staff. We follow a schedule." When Simone entered the room moments later, she found Zuri in tears and Matteo retreating into his silent, shut-down state, the very state she had worked so hard to break. Lydia stood there with a pinched expression, looking superior, as the children were led away by staff members Simone didn't recognize. "What are you doing?" Simone demanded, her mahogany eyes flashing with righteous anger. "I am observing the rules of this estate," Lydia countered, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are here to cook, Simone, not to play mommy to a Santoro. You're filling their heads with fairy tales when they need to be prepared for danger and power." Simone felt her heart pounding against her ribs. "You're hurting them just to get to me. That's not Mafia logic, Lydia. That's just being mean." "Call it what you want," Lydia snapped, turning on her designer heels. "But by the time I'm done, they won't even remember the taste of your soul food. They'll remember who truly belongs in the Santoro name." Simone stood in the empty theater, her pink satin bonnet slightly askew, realizing that Lydia was playing a ruthless game. She wasn't just trying to drive a wedge, she was trying to strip Simone of her magic by taking away the children who gave her purpose. Would you like me to continue where Simone decides to fight back by throwing a secret village greeting feast for the entire staff? Subscribe to SOBLESSED Love Stories to get more of these stories. Back to where Simone decides to fight back. Simone realized that if she was going to survive Lydia's ruthless psychological warfare, she couldn't do it by staying in the kitchen alone. She needed to remind the entire estate what warmth felt like, starting with the people Lydia treated like furniture. Late that night, Simone sent word through Gerald and the housekeeper, Bree Patterson, inviting the entire staff to a secret village greeting feast in the lower servant hall. She spent hours over the 6-burner gas range, her hands moving with a rhythm that only comes from years of practice, preparing a spread that represented the soul of her people. She made tender braised short ribs, creamy macaroni and cheese with the crispy edges, and honey cornbread that smelled of home and heritage. As the staff gathered, drivers, gardeners, and cleaners who were used to being invisible in the golden cage, Simone didn't just serve them food, she served them recognition. "In my world, we don't eat until the whole village is fed," Simone said, her mahogany eyes shining with motherly warmth as she handed a bowl to Earl, the groundskeeper. The room, usually too quiet for too long, soon filled with the sound of pure joy and shared stories. The staff, who had looked at her with barely concealed suspicion when she first arrived, now looked at her with interest and curiosity, realizing she was the first person in years to treat them like they mattered. The electric atmosphere was interrupted when Luca appeared at the top of the stairs. He stood there in the shadows, his athletic build and intense stare, taking in the scene of his staff laughing and eating the magic food. Behind him, Lydia watched with a pinched expression, her cheekbones sharp with a growing, righteous anger, as she realized Simone was building an army of loyalty that no amount of money could buy. "What is the meaning of this common gathering?" Lydia demanded, her voice a smooth, cultured purr that didn't hide her ugly sneer. Luca didn't answer her. Instead, he walked down the stairs, his bare feet silent on the floor. He looked at Simone, and for a second, the cold, judging authority was gone, replaced by a glacier melting in real time. He reached out and took a piece of cornbread, the heavenly aroma breaking through his Mafia logic. "It seems the kitchen isn't the only place Simone has magic in her hands," Luca murmured, his voice a deep, commanding rumble that made the staff go silent with respect. Lydia turned on her designer heels and stormed out, realizing that Simone's village greeting had just made her the most powerful person in the Santoro estate. Lydia's ugly sneer deepened as she watched the staff's loyalty shift toward Simone, realizing her Mafia logic was being dismantled by simple kindness. If she couldn't break Simone's spirit through Luca, she would strike at her only weakness, her daughter, Zuri. The following afternoon, while Simone was busy prepping braised short ribs for dinner, Lydia found Zuri playing near the indoor pool. Lydia approached with a pinched expression, her designer heels clicking sharply against the tile. She began to fill the young girl's head with cynical lessons, telling her that her mother's magic was just a trick and that they were nothing more than common help who would soon be thrown back to the West Philadelphia streets. "You think you belong in this golden cage?" Lydia purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your mother is just a food truck lady. Once the novelty wears off, Luca will remember that everything is about money, and you'll be back to counting your coins next to construction workers." When Zuri ran into the kitchen in tears, her 7-year-old face scrunched with curiosity and fear, Simone felt a righteous anger, unlike any she had felt before. She found Lydia standing in the hallway, looking superior as she adjusted her expensive watch. "You stay away from my daughter," Simone hissed, her mahogany eyes flashing with a fire that made Lydia's flawless skin pale. "You can come for me all you want, but the second you try to strip Simone of her magic by hurting Zuri, you've crossed a line you can't come back from." Lydia only laughed, a brittle sound that echoed through the two quiet halls. "I'm not the danger here, Simone. The violence and power of this world is. I'm just the one honest enough to tell her she doesn't belong." Simone realized then that Lydia wasn't just a ghost from the past, she was a ruthless predator who would use a child as a weapon. Simone's heart pounded as she realized she had to do more than just cook. She had to prove to Luca that Lydia's cold authority was a threat to the very warmth he was trying to protect. The tension that had been simmering within the Santoro estate finally reached a boiling point. Simone marched toward Luca's private study, her mahogany eyes blazing with a righteous anger that replaced her usual motherly warmth. She didn't knock. She threw the heavy oak doors open, the rhythm of her movements sharp and deliberate. Inside, Luca sat behind his mahogany desk, his athletic build coiled with the stress of the recent security breach. "We need to talk now," Simone stated, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the too quiet atmosphere of the room. Luca looked up, his hard, intense stare meeting hers. "Simone," I'm in the middle of. I don't care what you're in the middle of, she interrupted, mirroring the dismissive tone Lydia often used on her. Lydia is targeting Zuri. She is filling my daughter's head with cynical lessons and telling her we're nothing but common help who don't belong here. Luca's jaw tightened, and a flicker of his violent temper sparked in his eyes. Lydia is trying to ensure the danger and power of this world doesn't swallow us whole. She believes you are too soft for the Santoro name. Soft. Simone's laugh was brittle. I've spent years in the August heat, standing over flames to provide for my child. I am not the one who is weak. Lydia is the one who is mean and ruthless, using a 7-year-old as a weapon because she's threatened by a food truck lady. Luca stood up, his commanding rumble rising to a roar that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. You forget who you are speaking to, Simone. I am the one who provides the protection you need. I am the one who forced this life upon you to save my son. And I am the one who saved him. Simone shouted back, her heart pounding against her ribs. You can throw your billionaire weight around all you want, Luca, but if you let that woman break my daughter's spirit, you are no better than the ruthless enemies you're hiding from. The silence that followed was heavy and loaded. They stood inches apart, a clash of violent tempers that made the air between them crackle with tension. Luca's intense eyes searched hers, looking for a sign of retreat, but Simone didn't blink. If she speaks to Zuri again, Simone whispered, her voice a vibrating bass of pure intent, I am taking my daughter and leaving this golden cage, and you can find someone else to cook your magic food. Luca watched her leave, his sharp jaw set in a hard line. For the first time, the Mafia boss looked truly shaken, realizing that while he controlled the violence and power of the city, he was losing control of the only woman who had ever dared to stand up to him. The following morning, the atmosphere in the Santoro mansion was as cold and sharp as a winter dawn. Luca did not wait for Lydia to find him. He summoned her to the library, the room where the ghosts of his past felt most present. He stood by the window, his athletic build silhouetted against the gray morning light, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of cold, judging authority. You spoke to Zuri, Luca began, his voice a deep, commanding rumble that lacked its usual warmth. Lydia leaned against the mahogany desk, her cheekbones high and her pinched expression defiant. I told the girl the truth, Luca. She needs to know that this golden cage isn't her home, and her mother is a temporary fixture. I am protecting the Santoro legacy from common influences. Luca turned, his intense eyes flashing with a violent temper that made the air in the room feel heavy. You are not protecting my legacy. You are attacking my son's peace. Simone is the reason Matteo has stopped being a silent, shut-down ghost. She is a food truck lady, Luca. Lydia snapped, her smooth, cultured purr breaking into a brittle hiss. She doesn't understand danger and power. She thinks love is an ingredient. It's pathetic. It is what was missing, Luca countered, stepping into her space with a predatory grace. Your mafia logic and your ruthless status games have no place here anymore. You were a promise made by my father, but I am the one who rules this house now. He leaned down, his sharp jaw set in a hard line as he delivered a ruthless ultimatum. If you ever speak to Zuri again, or if you even look at Simone with that ugly sneer, I will have Enzo escort you to the gates myself. You are a guest in this house, Lydia. Simone is the one who makes it a home. Lydia's flawless dark skin paled, her designer heels clicking sharply as she took a step back in shock. She had never seen Luca choose warmth over power. You're choosing her? She whispered, her voice dripping with condescension and disbelief. I'm choosing my son, Luca replied, his hard, intense stare never wavering. Now get out. As Lydia stormed out, her righteous anger boiling over, she realized that Simone's magic had truly taken root. But as she disappeared down the hall, her mind began to weave a new, even more ruthless plan to prove that Simone was a liability to the Santoro name. The following morning, the golden cage felt less like a sanctuary and more like a target. Lydia, driven by a ruthless desire to reclaim her status, had leaked the estate's secondary security codes to a rival syndicate, intending to stage a security threat that would frame Simone as a liability. The air was thick and heavy, the August heat pressing against the mansion's stone walls as Simone stood in the kitchen. She was preparing a final village greeting feast, her hands moving with a rhythm that only comes from years of practice. Suddenly, the electric hum of the house died. The security alert didn't chirp this time. It screamed. Armed men in tactical gear shattered the crystal chandeliers of the foyer. Luca was in the library, cut off from the children by a wall of gunfire. Simone didn't hesitate. Her motherly warmth transformed into a righteous anger that burned hotter than her griddle. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron pan, her most trusted tool, and ushered Zuri and Matteo into the walk-in refrigerator, the only place with reinforced steel doors. As a masked intruder burst into the kitchen, Simone didn't cower. She moved with predatory grace, swinging the heavy iron with the strength of a woman who had spent years standing over flames. The clink of metal hitting bone echoed through the chef's paradise as she neutralized the threat, her mahogany eyes flashing with fire. Luca arrived moments later, his athletic build splattered with the evidence of his violent temper. He found Simone standing guard over the refrigerator door, her pink satin bonnet gone, her pixie curls damp with sweat, and a heavy pan gripped in her hands. The cold, judging authority in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacier melting in real time as he realized she had done what no soldier could. You protected them, Luca whispered, his voice a vibrating bass of pure awe. I told you, Luca, Simone panted, her heart pounding against her ribs. I don't break my word to children. Lydia was found at the perimeter, her pinched expression, one of absolute defeat as Enzo tightened the zip ties on her flawless dark skin. Luca didn't even look at his former fiancée. He walked to Simone and pulled her into a hug, his sharp jaw resting against her forehead. Lydia was wrong, Luca murmured, his intense stare finally finding its home in hers. I don't need a Mafia alliance. I need the woman who fought for my son with a frying pan. As the sun began to rise over the Santoro estate, Simone realized her future was no longer in doubt. She wasn't just a food truck lady or a civilian anymore. She was the heart of the Golden Cage, and she had finally found a man whose violent temper was only surpassed by his loyalty to the magic she carried in her hands. Would you like me to generate a new story outline for a different scenario, or perhaps an epilogue for Simone and Luca? 6 months after the final threat to the Santoro estate was neutralized, the Golden Cage had been completely transformed into a home filled with magic and joy. The heavy, too quiet, halls now vibrated with the constant energy of Zuri and Matteo, who had become inseparable siblings in every way that mattered. The chef's paradise of a kitchen was no longer a sterile showroom. It was the heart of the estate, where Simone continued to teach the children that love is an ingredient. Luca, once a man of cold, judging authority, could now frequently be found there with his sleeves rolled up, his athletic build leaning against the marble island as he watched Simone work. The Santoro legacy had shifted under Simone's influence. A new culinary venture, with Luca's billionaire backing, Simone opened Simone's Soul, a formal restaurant that combined her grandmother's recipes with the elegance of a Michelin star establishment. The staff's transformation, the estate staff, once treated like furniture, were now part of the village greeting culture Simone established, receiving fair compensation and genuine recognition. Matteo's recovery. The silent, shut-down boy had blossomed into a child of pure joy, his appetite and laughter fully restored by the motherly warmth he had found in Simone. On a quiet evening in the library, the room once filled with ghosts, Luca presented Simone with a small, velvet box. Inside was a ring that sparkled with a light that rivaled the crystal chandeliers above them. I spent my life thinking, everything is about money and violence and power, Luca murmured, his voice a deep, commanding rumble that had softened into a vibrating bass of pure devotion. But you showed me that the only thing worth controlling is a heart that loves you back. Simone looked at him, her mahogany eyes bright with tears of childlike hope. She realized she wasn't a civilian or a liabilities. She was the woman who had tamed a violent temper with a soul bowl and a righteous anger that protected the ones she loved. As they looked out over the gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see, Simone knew her future was no longer in doubt. She had started as a single mom feeding a lost boy for free, and she had ended up as the queen of a kingdom built on magic, joy, and a love that was truly on the house.